Bert! Get him! Yeah! Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. Hey everybody, it's the 2nd of June. I'm sitting in the kennel, the sun's shining. I got almost every one of my yard chores done yesterday. I think I'm going to take the dogs out for a little run. It's still cool out before it gets hot. And I decided, okay, I got to keep changing up the intro a little bit. I know a lot of my listeners say, Ron, I always listen to intro. Sometimes the episode sucks, but you just ramble on and I like it. So today, I'm going to try to turn this into a quiz. See how many you can get right. All right. What online mapping company supports you in every one of your outdoor adventures, from hunting to fishing to canoeing, kayaking, hiking, whatever you do in the outdoors? What company is it? What company makes the world's only transportation kennel that could go over Niagara Falls without your dog in it and still be in one piece when it got to the bottom? What company sells the most electronic equipment for dogs in the country? The most. What company makes the best training and tracking equipment to put around your dog's neck? Okay, are you keeping on this on the scoreboard? What company makes the best supplements for you and your dog? What company has more models of shotgun and has been in business since 1919 in this country? What ammunition manufacturer makes the world's finest copper-plated bismuth shells? What dog food company has been making quality dog food with scientific experiments and a staff of thousands to feed your dog since, 1902, whenever it was? What company has everything for your wild game kitchen except the meat? What clothing company has everything you could need from training season right up through hunting season? And everything you need for the summer, like beachwear. Okay? What company makes the best cap to put on the back of your truck for your adventures as a traveling wing shooter? What company makes the best 100% handmade rubber boots? I mean rubber. I don't mean synthetic. I mean, what company is it? And of course, what group of people are the most generous, thoughtful, and it's just generous? That's all. What group of people are the most generous in the country? Okay, that might be a trick one for some of you. The answers are On X, the title sponsor of this show, Gunner Kennels, DU Supply, Garmin, K9 Athlete, Mossberg, Boss Shot Shells, Purina Pro Plan, Waltons, Marshwear, Four Wheel Campers, Arcus Boots, ARKUS, USA.com. And of course, the last answer, what is the finest group of individuals that have ever been collectively put together in one area of the, whatever I'm trying to say? It's Patreon. Patreon patrons. Here's the real trick question. And I'll give you a discount code if you can come up with the answer. You can write me for it. What is the best online dog training school for your dog? What is it? Do you know the answer? Write me and I'll get you a discount code for it. Yeah, there you go. That was painless. That was what? 3 minutes, 51 seconds. Whoop-de-doo. Whoop-de-doo. I hope you're enjoying what I call the start to summer, the training season, all the stuff that brings. You'll be seeing some stuff coming out with the new 10-month-old dog. Well, she's going to be a year at the end of June. Working with her like I work with a puppy. I made real inroads with her yesterday. As far as kenneling goes, she was not a kennel dog. She didn't know what the inside of a truck kennel was. She didn't know what Anyway, you'll be patrons will be getting a lot of that, along with the history of my dogs that comes out once a month, sometimes twice a month this month. And of course they get discounts on like Marshware, which everybody gets, but patrons get a bigger one. Everybody can get Marshware at HDP 1.5, and everybody can get Waltons at HDP 1.0 for 10% off, and everybody can get Canine Athlete off 25% for the first order. But Patreon patrons get bigger discounts. That's how it works. Because you guys show the love, my sponsors show the love back to you. I love you guys. I love you girls. I love you girls more. All right. Hey, everybody. I am on a Zoom call with Dr. Joe Spoo. And there's a lot of initials after your name, DACVSMR, which I would assume is a veterinarian acronym. What does that all mean, Joe?
Yeah, so it's a diplomat, American College of Veterinary Sports Medicine and Rehabilitation. So basically a sports medicine specialist is.
Gotcha. And the reason, I used to listen to Joe's podcast back in the day, and I was like, oh, great. When I started doing a podcast, there was no hunting dog podcast. When you started doing it, was like, great, there's some information out there. And then, I don't know, you got a little busy, or were you already going down the path of putting your online school together? How did that turn out?
Yeah, it was just something that went by the wayside for a while. We'll probably relaunch it. It just, the whole online world, right? It's just figuring out what you have time for and what actually can make money, and some of the stuff doesn't, and some bills have to be paid. So I've had the Gun Dog Doc domain for going on 25 years, and so I've been in and out. I think the first podcast series I ever did was like '08, so long before podcasts were popular. But it's just something that's kind of come and gone over the course of the last quarter century. But I feel like now we're kind of in that age of being able to offer this kind of content, both audio, video. It's in its prime right now.
Right. And you're gonna either think I'm an idiot, which a lot of people do, or I just ask a lot of questions because I know that other people like, oh, that sounds like a dumb question, I don't want to ask it. So your course, is it called Gun Dog Doc? Is that the name of the course?
No, so it's my website is gundogdoc.com.
Right.
My social, but it's field emergency and first aid for hunting dogs.
Right. And I've got it up on my other computer, and I was like, oh, I don't want, because what I want people to get is that you compiled an online video. It's like having a vet in your hip pocket, kind of.
Right. Well, that's the hope. Yeah. Or to train you to do the things that you don't need a vet for out in the field.
Right. And you show in great detail with great, I would say, thoroughness. Everything I'm just going to touch on from hypoglycemia to dehydration to toxins to what happens from getting diarrhea. I mean, there's so many, I don't want to say wrong things to do, but it's like dog trainers. There's so many opinions, right? Somebody says, oh, don't feed them the next day. Oh, give them a probiotic. Oh, feed them a half, you get, I don't want to say into the weeds. You give great explanations on like all those, the things that people have come to you for. How many years have you been doing this now?
23, 24. So
I won't say you've seen it all, but you've had to see just about it all, right?
Yeah, about the time you say you see it all, some crazy shit walks through the door. So I'll never say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot of it.
No Siamese twin puppies yet or anything?
No, nothing like that. But you'll see some weird stuff on that puppy front as well. So
yeah. I mean, from puppy lameness, you can see.
Yeah, my wife sent me a picture last week. She had a dog in. We'll see different cleft palates in this dog, and it was several months old. I mean, the entire roof of its mouth was gapped. I mean, I'd never seen one that severe before, and the dog wasn't problematic. So, I mean, we'll see some weird stuff.
Yeah, when I used to do, or I still do for another organization, when I would be a field judge, one of our field things that the judges would do was we'd grade the coat and the if it was a male, that it had 2 descended testicles, and then we would do a teeth exam, and that was really just for the breeders who, sell the dogs and never get to see them again.
Right.
And so if you saw a puppy and there was 2 or 3 puppies that were overbite or undershot, or, that breeder could go onto that magazine and go like, oh, I didn't know that.
Right.
Some people wouldn't know that their dog was overshot or undershot if they're, pretty
Oh,
not.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I remember looking in this one dog's mouth, and I was like, hang on, let me. The dog, thank goodness, the dog was one of those dogs that veterinarians love. Is it lets you open its mouth?
Yeah.
Its owner obviously did a good job in, desensitizing it to it, but he never really looked in his mouth, and there was molars up in the roof of his mouth. I was like, how did that happen?
Right.
I mean, so yeah, I suppose, like I said, you haven't seen everything, but
Yeah.
in 23 years, you've obviously seen a lot. I also want to say that I did a course with a dog trainer, and we used the same format Kajabi that you guys did. And I want to tell people that it is a great system. I mean, I hate to say it, you can skip through courses, but
Right.
you can go through it. You can look at it at will. And once you buy it, it's like having that book in your hand,
Exactly.
And
And that's kind of how we designed the course, right? Was that you could take it all in as kind of a lecture in a lot of information, but then the shorter videos, you're out in the field and you're like, oh shoot, how do you say to staple that up, or, flush the eye? You can go back to just that one video that you need, as opposed to watching a 30-minute lecture for 2 minutes out of it. So
Exactly.
it's perfect that way.
Right. Yeah. Even when you talk about, encounters with other animals, you don't have to listen to a lecture. You can go right to porcupines, or,
Right.
I think,
Exactly.
I don't want to say genius. I'm sure you didn't do this all by yourself, did you, Joe?
Oh, not at all. No, no, I had a lot of guidance on how to make this all happen. So I had the idea, and it's back in the day, we're old enough that, I figured at some point I'd write this as a book, right? Like I never, early in my career, imagined putting together a video course like this. And so I've always had the ideas in my head of someday to do this as a book. And the video just, it's just so much easier, like with flushing the eyes, with, teaching someone to staple up a wound. You can't convey that in a book like you can in the video format.
Right. You'd have to be lost on an island to rather have a book than to not have this on your phone. And I'm sure, like the Upland Institute, it's not downloadable, but you could put it on your phone and watch it on your phone.
Correct.
Just as well as you could on your laptop, because
that's exactly.
And I don't think you'd ever, like we always tell people in dog training, this isn't something you bring in the field and try to look and try to train your dog. But the beauty about yours is you could be doing a tailgate exam or seeing your dog's eye, he's blinking or he's sneezing. And that would be so handy to just pop your phone up, which, these days we're lucky. I hardly hunt anywhere without cell service. To go there and go like, what did Dr. Joe say about, okay. Okay. I see. I mean, I'm just impressed when you sent that to me to watch it. I was like, well, I just got a bonus. It's like a Christmas bonus,
I appreciate that.
I hope my passcode doesn't expire just for the after.
We'll see how this goes.
How long did it take you to put it together? I'm going to guess.
I probably worked on it for a year, is what it amounted to. Part of it was I had initially reached out to a group that had done these type of courses in another industry, didn't hear back from them initially. And so started down kind of my own path to figure it out. And then I ended up connecting with them. And so then they were able to help me kind of tweak how to do it. Most of it I self shot. And then I had a period where I brought a good friend in, who's a video guy, and we did some of the B-roll and all of that. So we had to wait till fall, obviously, for some of that footage and things. So I think I started it, it was about a year ago. So it was in early last spring, late last winter is when we started it. So.
Right. And you're on a bit of a book tour right now with podcasts, which is great. So people get this out before this hunting season.
Yep.
I wanted to mention something too. You're going to be doing a webinar now. This won't come out in time for the webinar you're doing with Ugly Dog.
Yep.
Because they'll be able to rewatch that.
let people know what's that webinar gonna, what's that gonna be, a condensed version, or is it gonna be interactive question and
It's going to
answer?
be an interactive question. So when we launched the course, I did a webinar as part of the launch, and I think part of why I've gone down this path is that you do an event like Pheasant Fest, or you go to a NAVDA meeting, and most people struggle to find a vet that is engaged in hunting dogs or understand what these dogs are put through and things like that. And so there's a lot of questions that people have that they just don't get answered. And so I feel when I do these question and answer type of forums, I think that's, everybody really enjoys them and they're really engaged. And so when we launched the course is it March? I think it was March when we launched it. We had a big turnout for this webinar, and I didn't make it just about the course, right? Like part of having the confidence that I'm going to be able to teach you these things is just understanding what my depth of knowledge is. And so the question and answer part, I find that too, when I travel and do seminars, I'll do my seminar on a subject, and it's just like people are sitting there just waiting for the question and answer part. That had nothing to do with the yes, exactly. And they just want to ask a question to a veterinarian that's familiar with hunting dogs, because there's a lot of how we do things with these hunting dogs, and the injuries and issues that they have are unique and no fault to other veterinarians. They just don't see them regularly because it's unique to hunting dogs.
Right. And yeah, it's just like, it's as special as regular medical doctors, human doctors. There's so many, just like your sports medicine. Like, I mean, that probably wasn't even a thing, I'm going to guess, 20 years ago, where
it wasn't. No, it wasn't even. I mean, I think we're just coming on just over 10 years, maybe 10 to 12, 13 years. So it was something that, to be quite honest, most people with that interest, we had to do it in the human realm, to get any sort of advanced education or degrees. And so at the time that the specialty college was developed, I was actually in a PhD program for human performance nutrition, because that was where I was going to get my advanced exercise, call it sports medicine education, was on the human side, and then try to apply it to these dogs. And about that time when I was in starting that program is when the specialty college became a thing. And so I obviously shifted gears and went down that path.
In some of your, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I want to go back to the courses. Where is that one? I was just watching. I was trying to rewatch a few of them that were near and dear to my heart. And you did the one on blue-green algae.
Yeah.
Like I think I got my first hunting license in 72. Now, I didn't have a dog until late 80s or no, mid 80s, but until about 10 years ago, I never even heard of blue-green algae. Is that just not been on the radar?
No, so it has. When we had that, I don't know, it's probably going on 20 some years ago, we had all those deaths on opening day out here in the heat. And pheasant opener, a lot of people tried to pin it on blue-green algae and things like that. So, I mean, it's been something that's been on the radar for a long time. I think the difference is, if we want to go down this path, is how agriculture practices have changed out here, right? Especially with ethanol, and we've lost a lot of CRP. People tile everything, and so what happens is you get all of this concentrated runoff, and so every bit of standing water is just ripe with nutrients, as opposed to being filtered through wetlands and filtered through the ground. And so I think it's a lot more common than it used to be. And so it used to be like you kind of knew where it would be in a handful of areas. Now we'll see it in big bodies of water that I would have never thought we'd see it in, but we've just concentrated all of these ag products and fertilizers and whatnot into every bit of standing water that, we get these, dry and concentrated areas late in the summer. And I think it's everywhere now.
Yeah, because it was like when I go out west, the landowners that I know and hunt with, they'll literally say, "Hey, we've been walking all over, and we noticed some over here." Like, it's on there. Right. It's on everybody's radar these days.
Yeah. Because I mean, cattle can die from it. Horses can. I mean, it's not just a dog thing. I mean, it's fatal to whoever ingests it. So
yeah. Has there been? Well, I guess accidental. You mentioned something in that part about blue-green algae, that even if the dog were to wade through it and get it all over themselves.
Yep.
That not necessarily, of course, most dogs that would wade in the water are going in there to get a drink.
Right.
but even if they ran through it, it's,
not because they're going to absorb it through the skin, but we know, every one of those dogs licks themselves to clean. You put them in the crate when they're wet, they immediately start licking themselves. And so it's that sort of thing where, even if they got into it and didn't drink it, if you don't rinse them off or clean them off, it could still be problematic.
Yeah. And there's really nothing that can be done about that. If
there isn't. I mean, it's one of those, if they had a small dose, and I suppose if you got them in right away, supportive, there's no antidote. I mean, so it's going to smoke the liver, and most dogs don't survive it. I mean, it's a miserable way to die.
You mentioned about the heat, and this is a self-serving question for me.
Sure.
Okay. Have you ever heard the topic, heat tolerance in a dog? Like, this dog is not very heat tolerant. And you could say, well, he's got a heavier coat, or he's got a lighter coat, or I've had an observation on a dog now that, like, if I had to get up on a soapbox and say, here's what I found, I would say the minute I get anywhere into the mid-50s, this dog slows down.
Yep.
Slows down, comes in for water to a point where I think it's way excessive. So I've been concerned about that. Is there correlations to other, like, to blood work and other functions that, or could it be a almost like a low desire dog? He's like, I'm too hot. I just, have you ever?
I don't even know if it's low desire. Like, I just think some dogs are more sensitive to like, I've never owned what I would call a truly heat tolerant dog. And maybe part of it's paranoia, because I've seen what happens if a dog goes over the line. But it's one that I start getting above the mid 60s, and I start getting super cautious with these dogs. And but I've seen, so, like, back in the day, you have guys trained for the nav to duck search on a 98-degree day with a, thick coated wire hair that would have no problems with that, where my dog, looking at that dog exercise, would probably keel over from heat stroke. And so, I mean, I think there's some dogs just are heat tolerant and some dogs aren't. And I never want to push the envelope with mine. And so they start showing some of those symptoms like you're saying, and I just shut it down, because I've seen the other end of that equation. Right. And so like, if it's one, if you're like, oh, he's just being a wussy, let's push him through it, and you're wrong. It's a horrible consequence. And so I just, and we've all been there. I mean, you run dogs long enough, and you're going to get a dog too warm. It's just a matter of, can you shut it down and reverse it before it becomes problematic? And so it's one, I truly think that there are some dogs that are super heat, and that weekend that we lost all the dogs on that South Dakota opener 20 years ago, we were hunting a farm up north of Aberdeen, and the ranch dog, went along with us everywhere, and how it was a woolly coat. I mean, it was so thick, and that dog didn't even stop for water, because he was used to just being out all, the dogs were shutting down. Everybody was miserable. We had a couple of older guys in the group that we thought, were going to keel over. And the heaviest coated dog in the whole pack was doing fine. He was just like, hey, it's just another day out on the farm, So I truly think some of it is just heat tolerance to that dog. I don't think it's breed specific. I mean, I've seen short coated dogs that just can't tolerate it, and super heavy coated dogs that can. So
that's encouraging for my dilemma, because I've literally, like, boy, is there, but then I go to a 50-degree drizzly day, and he's great,
You're right.
And I'm like, oh, now you're not going to come in for water, because you're you're getting it in your face. But to bleed into something else, that when I was watching you on your checking the dog's temperature.
Yeah.
And I was literally like, well, I'm going to watch this one close and see but you covered something that I've told people that makes me sound smart. Knowing your dog's normal running temperature. A vet told me that probably 10 years ago. And I'm not really, like, I don't have a great first aid. I got enough to get by. I got some wrap and some hemostats to pull out a porcupine quill. I'm going to rely on the vet unless I have any other thing to, I'd rather rely on the vet. I've never, felt I'm that good. But I have asked a lot of people, and I get this look like, do you know what your dog's normal temperature is? No. And then, do you know what it is when it's working or you're training? Like, for heat exhaustion, and what is that? What is the right term for heat exhaustion?
Heat stroke.
Heat stroke. Just knowing that could be a game changer. You could find something. You could find such important data out quick by just checking that temperature of that
Exactly.
dog. If you're like with that dog next year, I kind of took your path with him. I said, okay, he's just not heat tolerant. I did not check his temperature, and I'm really mad that I didn't check his temperature at the truck. But that is one thing, like you even show how to do it, right?
Right.
I've had litters of pups over the years, so I obviously I learned how to do, rectal thermometer.
Right.
But I remember having other people over here, a friend across the street last year, and I said, well, bring your dog over, let's check his temperature. And when I did it, he's like, oh, you're kidding me. Oh, you're kidding me. I said, he's fine. He didn't even know.
Well, that's what's the day we shot that B-roll in the clinic. That day, a client asked why we didn't have the forehead scanners and in the ear thermometer. So it's one of those things we just take for granted because we do it every day. But you get out in the field and you're like, well, how am I going to take my dog's temperature? And people just, it's a simple thing that again, people aren't aware of because they don't do it every day. And I think to your point, that what will shock people is the time we're coming into now, right? Where it's starting to warm up. We're at the start of summer, where you get that dog hot, but not to the point of heat exhaustion. And you stick a thermometer in there, and I think people will be shocked at how high that temperature can get in a non-heat stroke dog, and that's the important thing, right? To understand maybe 106 is fairly normal when your dog's working out, know?
Right. And if it was resting and somebody, if you on a televet, I'm pretending,
right.
If they check your dog, if you said 106 on a sleeping dog,
right.
you might as well dig a hole. So yeah, and I guess they have no way of regulating. Well, I guess they can regulate their body temperature, but they don't sweat like we do, obviously.
Correct. Yeah, it's all through the respiratory tract, and so and I mean minimal elsewhere, and certainly cooling them down, you can get evaporative cooling, but it's a pretty inefficient cooling mechanism, especially in actual heat. So
yeah, what would you say to this question? How much of now when we're just talking about heat tolerance and taking your dog hunting, and like you said that one day 20 years ago in South Dakota, how much conditioning would play a part of that?
It's huge. And that's, I think it's knowing your dog's level of heat tolerance, but then also conditioning. I think that's the other part of the equation that people forget about is, two things. One, the actual conditioning, but then also the weight. In this day and age of premium dog food, people get in the habit of feeding the same amount every day, right? Whether the dog's super active or not. And it really should be an up and down. When the dog's active, it's going to need more calories. When it's not, it needs to cut back. And what happens, particularly the last several summers, we've had really hot August wherever you are in the country. I got friends out in the mountains of Montana that it's in the 90s late in August.
Right.
And it's just, this part of the country, in corn country, it used to be like when I was a kid, it'd at least cool off at night and you could probably do things first thing in the morning. And now, we get into July and August and it's humid, it's hot. Right. And so you take that dog right before hunting season, and a lot of them haven't gotten a lot of good conditioning. We probably haven't adjusted their nutrition. And so they're a little bit heavy going into hunting season. Right. And man, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. And that's, I'll have guys come in, before dove opener or before pheasant opener, and it'll just be this big, fat, out of shape Labrador. And, oh, he's the best hunting dog in the world. And all I can see is that dog's going to either blow out its knees or die a heat stroke, so.
A while back, I contacted you because I was going through some archives, and before I knew you were doing this online, the veterinary care, you did that podcast with Dr. Sarah Schul. She's a friend of mine, and you guys knocked it out of the park with the cruciate ligament. We won't have time to get into all that, but the one thing that if you took away from Dr. Sarah Schul was she has no problem fat shaming dogs.
Exactly.
She's like, it breaks her heart to have somebody come in and go like, you got to get some weight off that dog. How How ribby do you like to feel a dog?
I like to have them pretty ribby.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And so it's one that the I think people don't quite, there was a period where, especially part of the problem is show dogs, right? People watch Westminster and they think, oh, this lab should be huge and you should never see ribs on a dog. And you take the other extreme, like a Vizsla or a Pointer, where you should see almost all of their ribs.
Right.
And people can't kind of make that transition. And so I think the big thing is you should be able to see the last couple of ribs on pretty much every breed. You get a coated dog like a Golden or a Munsterlander or something, then you're going to have to feel for them. But I like to see the last, 2, 3, 4 ribs. I think is super important, and probably the vast majority of our dogs are running a lot heavier than that.
Right. Because you'll have those things on bags of food. It'll say, "Oh, does your dog have a waist?" Well, you look at your dog from the top, and if he's not morbidly obese, he still has
There's still a weight. Yeah. And I think too, the other thing that happens is some of those dogs get that barrel chested look.
Yeah.
Where it looks like they have a waist, but it's just that they got so much damn fat over their ribs that
like me, I'm barrel chested, but
Exactly.
I still got a little too much
Exactly.
weight,
Exactly.
I have a waist, but I'm still overweight,
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned something in that series too about adjusting food. And I'm in the habit of, I've got a cup that I use. It's literally a promotional cup I got from Purina's. I have a stack of them. And each dog I kind of shake a few more out of, and I'm like, yep, that's about right for her. That I don't actually measure it. I just know what they take. But I'll be guilty of off season. I probably should be really cutting them down even more when they're.
I would guess so. Most people fail at that. I'd say the vast majority. And that's it is. And like I have 2 50-pound dogs right now, and they get vastly different amounts of food. And they both run with me. They both are doing active things.
Right.
But the setter's covering way more ground than the Labrador. And there's days that he gets twice as much food for her than her. Right. And they're both 50-pound hunting dogs, right? So if I looked at the back of the bag, the recommendation would be the identical, and they're almost, double or half, however you want to look at it, the amounts of food that I'm putting in those 2 dogs.
Yeah, because I'm sure you've heard the person say, "I'm feeding them 6 cups a day." Or, it says 8,
Yes, but, quite regularly we hear that.
One thing I think that's really, I don't want to say passed on through tailgate knowledge is, I never heard of doing this again 30 years ago, is putting water into the dog's food when you're feeding them. Now, do you do that on hunting trips or at home also? Or I tend to only do it on hunting trips, and I really don't know if that's smart or not smart.
Yeah, so a couple of things about that. So I do use it once in a while. Not necessarily, I think a lot of people say, oh, it's a way to get water into them and things like that. The thing I'd worry about is just quantity that we're putting in a dog, right? And so that kind of opens a whole can of worms. Should we be feeding once a day or twice a day? Right. That sort of recommendation has kind of gone over some shifting in the last 20 years where, we always fed dogs twice a day growing up, and then it went to dogs perform better on once a day feeding. Right. And now we're, so then everybody's feeding once a day year round. And now what we worry about is if we're putting that big quantity in a dog once a day over the course of time, are we fatiguing that gastric ligament and proning these dogs to bloat later in life? And so I've gone back to, in the off season, I feed twice a day. During activity or hunting season, I'll feed once a day. And so then to adding the water, if I'm feeding once a day and it's a big volume, so let's say you're feeding 4 cups and I'm adding water to that, man, am I really filling that stomach up? And that might not be the best method. If you got a smaller dog where, you're feeding 3/4 of a cup or a cup and a half, I don't fill the dish with water. I basically just a little bit of water in there. And for me, it didn't start as a way to get them more water. These setters, will go anorexic on a multi-day hunting trip. And so oftentimes it was just a way to get the dogs to eat. I always joke that the dust on the outside of the food, it just forms a little bit of nature's gravy when you add a little bit of water to the food. And so I do it just to kind of increase palatability. Right. If that's how we're getting a lot of water into the dog, my big concern would be how much volume at one time are we putting into that dog, and could we potentially be predisposing it to bloat issues down the road?
So, I mean, biologically speaking, I thought my interpretation of it was, again, probably from some tailgate with another hunter. Um, Again, I don't float it either. I don't have the food sitting on top of a
Yeah.
quart of water, but I get the food wet and I shake it and I let it sit a little bit. And I have found that for palatability, that's definitely the dog. It does make a little gravy, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I remember this person told me was that if the dog eats dry dog food, it's going to need moisture from its body to soften it up and increase and turn it in. If a dog is drinking normally and has access to water and not under a exercise situation, is access to water just as good as floating the food?
I think so. Yeah. And because the body has all these mechanisms to counter and to help with that sort of stuff. And so I think point one, I would say is, again, is it that dog's not getting access to enough water? Is that our primary problem?
Right.
And where I think it becomes is, you get these guys, with a topper full of dogs in a dog trailer. It's hard to have those dogs have access to water all the time, right? Versus those of us that are running a couple of dogs. Oftentimes those dogs are going in the motel with us at night. You're throwing a bowl of water down so the dog can access it. And so I think it's kind of that two categories, right? That dog that doesn't get much water. And so every chance that you get to get water in that dog, people are taking it. And food, feeding time is one of those. Versus if you have a dog that has access to water all the time, I don't think it's not that crucial tipping point that's going to give you a little bit of an edge or your dog a little bit of an edge if we just soften that food. To me, the big thing is palatability. Like, I think it just helps get some of these dogs to eat, and you're getting a little more moisture into them.
Right. Feeding after exercise, I think everybody's pretty much pretty much on board with that. There's a lot of dogs that flat out wouldn't even eat after they got done hunting because they're still respirating and they're still cooling their body down. It's almost like some dogs are smart enough to know, but then other dogs, I had a German Shorthair once that I swear in 3 bites, it could empty it. It would swallow its kibble, like literally.
Yeah, that's how my lab is. Like, there's times that this is no kidding, where I fed both dogs and like I'll set the setters down. I was like, oh crap, did I forget to put the food in her dish? Yeah. I mean, like literally in the time to set the second bowl down, she's done with her food.
I've got to think that can't be good for. Of course, dogs don't chew it up into
They
like
don't.
we do.
No.
But I like it when I see the dog, like you said, oh shit, couldn't be done already, right?
Yeah.
Then there's other ones that kind of pick, but I want to talk about those picky dogs, both water and food. I remember going on the first hunting trip many, many years ago, South Dakota, and both of our dogs lost a lot of weight just because we weren't even smart. We were so excited to go to South Dakota. We put both our dogs down on the ground at the same time, all the time. And my dog was still eating and drinking. His dog was drinking, but he was also a dog that didn't want to eat when he was on the road. I'm assuming it was because he was on the road. I don't want to say it's because he was so excited he wanted to go hunting, right?
Right.
What do you do, or what do you recommend to people if their dog is a poor eater, especially on the road?
Yeah. So I have this problem horribly with my set. Every setter I've ever owned has been that way. And I'll never forget. So my wife is a veterinary specialist as well, but she practiced in Fort Lauderdale for the first 10 years of her career and then came up here. So as vastly of different environment as you're going to get.
Yeah.
And the first time we did a Western trip, I came back and Belle, this dog behind me, came back skin and bone. She just didn't eat for 3 days. I walked in and she said, "What the hell did you do to Belle?" Yeah. And so it's a constant battle, because I think what the thing that I would caution people against is that, you panic, right? You're like, oh, I got to get calories in this dog. It's working. And so you go out, for a steak that night and you come home with the gristle and you think, oh, I'm going to get this dog to eat. Mm-hmm. People will go to that extreme and try to get them anything. And if it's a dog that's a picky eater, I'd wager it probably also has a sensitive digestive tract. And so then we go and give it a bunch of greasy food and we end up with, diarrhea and vomiting, and we've just probably made the problem worse. And so I kind of stagger it. So my first step is the step we just talked about is I'll add water to the food as my first step. If that doesn't work, then I'll use a little bit of canned food of the same type of food that I'm feeding. And so I don't, it's always tempting to get the smelliest, crappiest, cheapest dog food because it seems like it's going to get them to eat. But again, I think that major change can cause stomach upset with these dogs. And so I'll try to use the canned food of the brand and version I'm feeding. The other thing that I've had people do is there are a couple of prescription formulas for hospitalized pets that are real calorically dense and are gentle on the intestinal tract. And so there are some dogs that's what I'll travel with is the hospitalized diets because they're a little bit more flavorful, and basically just use a little bit of that mixed with water to create a gravy. There's some probiotic products that are a flavored packet that I'll use those sort of things, but I keep it pretty minimal. I try to not give in too much because I don't want to cause stomach upset. And so if the dog's attitude's good, it's running hard, and it's a 3 or 4 day trip, I don't go overboard with enticing them. I try to stair stepping into it. I find too that, like, again, it goes back to, is this dog in a box or is it a dog you're gonna be able to keep an eye on? Because, if it's a dog in a box and, you got 30 minutes to eat and we're cleaning everything up and putting it back in the box, that's a different situation than, like my dogs are in the motel room with me. And so, I might try, to your point, where you get that dog that maybe doesn't want to eat immediately post hunt, but maybe 2 hours later they will. Well, if I'm sitting in the motel room, I can put that dog dish back down in front of them. And so I don't give up either. I feel like, giving them multiple opportunities, which is different than at home, right? Like if I'm at home and a dog decides they're not going to eat, they just don't get to eat and I pick it up and we'll deal with it tomorrow. And so it's not about babying them. I think people overdo it with trying to get them to eat and end up causing more problems. And so I don't get too worked up if they don't eat for a couple of days. And then if I'm going to try something, I'm going to try simple things that are just a novelty to that dog, but don't go to, down to the local steakhouse and give them all the gristle off your ribeye, because I think that's going to be problematic as well.
Yeah. I remember Jeff's solution was we went and bought, pre-made gravy for human.
Right.
And I'm sure that was not good for the dog system,
Yeah, but it might not be the worst idea in the, I think that would be probably better than, like, the trimmings from a steak or things like that. And there are a couple of products on the market now that are formulated for dogs that are similar to that. I haven't used them yet. I actually at Pheasant Fest, I had an individual give me that has a bone broth company that I think is enticing. He was kind of marketing as indoor exercise performance product, which I don't think is the way I would. I think this exact application might be the place to use something like that. If you get a tasty broth that's formulated for dogs and you could pour that on the food, I think would be a good solution to that issue. And I plan on trying it this fall.
But I bet you're some old school guy that would say, if they don't eat it, they're not hungry.
Right. Right.
And a dog, I remember a guy telling me this, and I had a dog that was proof of this, that was lost for like over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know when I got that dog, it was amazing that it was alive. It was found in a deer hunter's blind. And this dog could barely walk. And the funny thing was, there was water nearby. There was a creek and a wet spot. This is a long story short. What happened is he got out with another dog of mine, didn't come back. We assume he got hit by a four-wheeler, maybe hit by a car. He ended up with a broken pelvis.
Oh, geez.
But where he found this literally a ground deer blind that became his doghouse. He obviously had access to water, but he didn't have access to food. So I guess I'm going back to what Dr. Sarah says. They can go a long time without a lot of food. And I don't say you're not going to get performance out of them, but to not worry when they don't eat. Like when I've had dogs on the road with diarrhea, and you even go into some great detail, like what does that diarrhea look like?
Right.
You could have, I could think of 5 versions. We don't want to go into all of what diarrhea looks like in a dog, but when my wife's dog's at home or one of my dogs at home here has diarrhea, I just don't feed them the next day.
Right. Absolutely. And that's probably the best, like people miss that as like, that is the treatment of choice. Like if I was to do one thing with a diarrhea dog, it's that. Like you don't want to restrict water because you don't want them to be
Right.
dehydrated. But like if you just give the intestinal tract a chance to just chill out and repair itself,
Right.
90% of the time, that's going to solve your problems. And I think what happens, particularly a dog on a hunting trip, right, where we think we got to get him calories, you end up compounding that problem. Like, oh no, they got loose stools and we got to get them to eat. And you're just throwing that dog out of whack further
Right.
versus if you just step back and say, let's just take a break for a second,
Buying a
It,
box of Riceland rice and trying to get them to eat rice.
yeah. And that's where too, like from the performance standpoint, like if I have a dog with loose stools or diarrhea, but their attitude's good and they want to hunt, everything else about them, I'm still going to hunt that dog. It's there's a couple of kind of a mental checklist, and I kind of go over it in the series that if their attitude's bad, if there's other things going on, then we're going to shut it down. But, I don't think that diarrhea has to be a trip ending situation for these dogs. It's just like not eating. I think if a dog doesn't eat for a couple of days, but their attitude's great, they want to be out in the field,
Yeah.
then we're going to run.
Yeah. I think that's what I got a lot of in your stuff is you've got to look at you can't just look at the one thing.
Right.
The overall dog's performance and learn to read your dog. Right.
Correct.
Even to the point of like, she's not really trying that hard. Okay, Mal, maybe there's something to it.
Right. Right.
And, one thing is different from years ago. I don't want to say everybody, but most, let's just say traveling wing shooters, other than a weekend warrior. I had one dog. Jeff had one dog. My friend Matt had one dog.
Yeah.
You mentioned like, hey, put another dog on the ground. Like, oh, Joe's assuming correctly. Most people have more than one dog these days.
Right.
Which is, I don't want to say it's a bigger challenge because we can't help but compare our dogs to each other instead of looking at them like individual dogs. They're like you said, you've got 250-pound dogs and they couldn't be more different.
Right.
I
lucked out, back same when I started out, I had one dog and she could do it all day.
Right.
And then you get dogs that can't, and you're like, man, did I get lucky with that first one? Because these other dogs are not up to the same challenge as that dog was.
Now you have setters and labs, correct?
Yep. And we'll be adding, I've had cockers too. So we'll be adding a fieldbred cocker probably within the next 6 months. So.
Oh, nice. I'm on my second one.
I don't think there's anything like a fieldbred cocker. They're just, personality wise.
And just around the camp I would not say labs don't run away, but they're typically a closer working dog. So they're not supposed to go out 300 yards and look for game. Right. But I have never had a pointing dog that didn't decide to go take a walkabout.
Exactly.
And you're on a trip and you're so mad, you're just so mad at this dog. Like, and that little fieldbred cocker, if you don't see it, you just go, shh, boom, it's on your lap. Everything's right in the world.
Yeah. I've never owned a breed that I've wanted to kill so many times in a day, but that makes the day better than anything ever. Like it just, they have such a diverse personality that it's been an empty house without one in ours.
Yeah. I've told people, I said, I'll change different breeds. I've got a couple different ones, but ever since I got my first one, there won't be one unless it's, tragic,
Right.
I'll have number 2 coming along when that one's a few years older. In fact, this is, again, just a people might think question. Do you find a difference in, like, say, the dogs that are in the, let's say, 30 to 40-pound range? Do you find, is it harder on a 50 to 60-pound dog than a 60 to 70-pound dog? Is there any differences there, or is that just are dogs? Like, is there
I think you certainly, as those dogs get bigger, you see more potential breakdown problems. There's always exceptions to every rule, but you just look at human athletes, right? Like centers in the NBA or linemen in football, those guys break down. And I think the same thing happens with these dogs. It's just the bigger a dog gets, the more potential problem, particularly if we're talking upland dogs, right?
Right.
You have a dog that's sitting in a blind doing retrieves is a little bit different than a dog that's out there pounding in the uplands. But yeah, I think with uplands, there's a diminishing return with sizes, and there's exceptions, but I'm a smaller frame dog guy. I think that they're just endurance athletes usually are, right? They're usually kind of light and agile. They're not these great big bulky things. And so I think we see that definitely in these dogs as well.
Yeah. Okay. I said we weren't going to go down this road, but I do want to touch a little bit well, in one of your courses, you talk about lameness and what it can be and things to look for and how to, I mean, it was like having my favorite vet, old Doc Zamron, who's retired. It's like having him there, because it's so much. He was so much common sense, like, and you kind of show that like there's never a change in the timbre of your voice while you're. It's a calm, like none of this stuff is undoable or what you know what I'm trying to say. He was always, like the dog will tell you what's wrong,
Right.
But when you go to the bigger dogs, you don't have a way of knowing if they're and I'm getting to cruciate ligament here. You don't have a way of knowing, and I look at it like genetics, like desire. So there's some dogs that have a higher desire, and it's almost a desire to run. Even you could almost say in some cases they're not even hunting.
Right. No, I've seen those dogs where it's just a race.
It's a race, and you're like, well, wait, there's no bird between here and the horizon, right? And then you put that onto a 60 or 70-pound dog. So this is really a crazy question. Cruciate ligament, it's called a disease, just like dysplasia causes disease, but it's a skeletal malformation, or what's the word I'm looking for? Is it poor conformation, or is it more than just poor conformation?
It's more than poor conformation. I think it's a couple of things. And that's why I think it's been so problematic that we don't have like a breeding solution for it, because you'll have dogs that are predisposed to it, but it can also be an athletic injury. And so, just like with people, you can step in a hole and you blow out your cruciate. You can have that with a dog. The problem is differentiating that, right? So like a dog comes into the clinic and it's a 12-month-old lab that, both knees are swollen. I'm pretty certain that that's a genetic issue. Where it gets a little murkier is that 7-8-year-old dog that comes in, was that a athletic injury, or is it potentially that same? It just took him a longer period of time to express the problem in that knee. Yeah. And so we think, with the cruciate disease, it's conformational to a degree. And so, the popular method for repairing them is a TPLO, where we take and cut that shin bone and rotate it and change the angle of the knee. So we're not actually replacing or repairing what the cruciate ligament does. We're changing the geometry of it. The other factor of it is it's not just a bone disease, right? Like it's a ligament. And so then there's some question, do some of these dogs not lay the fibrous tissue down and the ligaments, are they not building those correctly? Is there an inflammatory component? So, not necessarily like an autoimmune disease, but is there inflammation going on in that knee? And you have that ligament over time fraying like a rope. And so there's a bunch of different ways that this can result in a tear. And that's why we call it a disease, because there's a multiple processes to get to the same end result versus say, a dog breaks its leg, it has a broken leg. That the ligament disease can be a number of factors that can lead to it. It's probably, I think, one of the things that those of us that purchase puppies need to really get on top of in asking breeders about. And that's the only way we're going to get in front of it. So we're seeing cruciates in dogs that earlier in my career, I would have never thought that we'd have cruciate ligament disease. And I think it's the look and the style that Americans like in their dogs. I have no doubt we've created the problem through breeding selection based on the stature that we like in a dog. And we're not going to undo that until we start saying, are you breeding a dog that's had 2 TPLOs? Well, I'm not buying a puppy from you. And start asking those questions. And there are genetic tests coming. So like, the University of Wisconsin has a test for Labradors. I don't think it's gotten much traction yet, to be honest with you, like some of the other testing has. And so I think it's going to have to be a pushback from puppy buyers asking those questions about cruciate ligament disease.
Yeah, it almost, to be a little sarcastic, it's almost like if I said when I was in school, there wasn't any kids in my class with a peanut allergy, right? And then
Right.
and when I started hunting, I never heard the term, you know. I
Because
mean,
you were in the pointing dog world, and we, like, you didn't
right,
see it in short hairs, you didn't see it in Drothars, you didn't see it in
right.
pointers, and now all of those breeds, and that's, I always tell people, my setters, I wasn't anal about the breeder doing health clearances because they were breeding performance dogs. I loved their dogs. They were doing everything they could to produce a great dog. I didn't think twice about, OFA on the hips and stuff like that because I knew what I was getting from an athletic dog point, you
Right.
know, and I thought that about cruciates. And shoot, now there's probably not a breed that we don't see it in that 20 years ago that you didn't see this problem to this degree. And it's not just because there's more people. We've created it in these breeds.
Yeah, yeah, and I imagine the same is true with hip dysplasia, right? I mean, to some degree, it
Yeah, I
was
think we've probably improved that though. I feel like we're
that,
seeing a lot less of
that's
that.
been way improved
Yeah,
because like even your basic breeder will have,
correct.
OFA or pen hip
Yep.
done. So maybe there's hope on the horizon. Like you said, maybe in another decade, people are more aware of that because I think you said it or somebody else I heard say it. You could have one leg blowout one season, another blowout the next season, and you've missed two hunting seasons with your dog.
Oh, and
And
it's common, and that's especially with these labs. Like we'll have, you get a young guy that comes in with his first dog and it blows out, the first knee before the first hunting season, second knee before the second hunting. You got a 3 or 4 year old dog that this guy's got $10,000 in that's
right,
never seen a day out in the field. And it's heartbreaking.
yeah,
And it's an expensive procedure. But I think the pushback is going to have to come from puppy buyers. I don't think, I shouldn't say this as a general statement because I'm sure there's breeders that are doing this right, but I don't think in general people are going to just out of the goodness of their heart stop breeding these dogs that have had TPLOs. Particularly, you start talking in the field trial world, right, where people have quite a bit of an investment in these dogs, and
right.
now at 5 it blows out both its knees. Well, a lot of those people are still going to breed that dog because they want to recoup, the money they've got into it. It's an unfortunate part of it, that just those of us as puppy buyers are going to have to start demanding better.
Um, in this, we're ended up in a rabbit hole. I said we weren't going to go down, but I can't help it. It's I would say I've been fortunate. I only had one dog, and I think it was an athletic just an
Sure.
injury. And his other leg, I went to my old school vet, and this is not recommendation for anybody, but he said, Ron, half the NFL players played in the NFL with torn cruciate ligaments, right? They're going to have arthritis. They're going to have a limp later on in life. Uh, is that pretty much was the case back in then when somebody saw a dog coming in a little limp or front or back leg? It probably wasn't even diagnosed back then, was it? Hard other than
Yeah, I mean, I would, like the TPLO has been around for over 20 years now. And before that, we were fixing them, with the extracapsular technique. And
okay,
so, it is something that's fixable. And what I would say to that is, when we come in and get these dogs with an injury, my goal isn't to, just get them so that they can go out the yard and go to the bathroom without limping. Most of these dogs, we're trying to return to a full field career. And so particularly like with cruciates, and I think that that's where some of the problem is that you'll have these dogs blow out the cruciates and go back out and finish their field championship and then be bred. And so especially with cruciates, I think it's a fixable problem that the dog maybe even ends up better than it was before, particularly if it's had some issues in the knee. And so it's a little bit different than I'd say like with you and I, with our cruciate. I think a lot of these dogs end up being better after that particular surgery. Front legs is a whole different discussion. I hate front leg lamenesses.
yeah.
So
And is that usually an elbow or can it be a shoulder thing?
shoulder is really problematic. And part of the problem is with shoulders, especially, is that, they usually get in my hands after the dog's been limping for 18, 24 months. And so by that point in time, there's a lot of changes that have happened that can't be undone. And it's because oftentimes it's a come and go type of lameness, where the dog will seem fine sometimes and not other times. And so people kind of drag out, getting it addressed until it gets to be real problematic.
Do you think, all right, this is my This is my bar room fix for this. Okay. Now this could be really bad, Joe, because this is different than most of the other. I was thinking of like, we can't go through every course and everything.
Sure.
I want people to know, like, this is something that if you're a dog owner, like, I would say you should have this course, just because it'll answer a ton of questions for you that will actually save you a call to the vet and going somewhere on a weekend.
Right.
A lot of this stuff is very doable. You guys aren't magicians. You're showing us what you do in the clinic, like
Correct.
out of the eyelids and checking their all the stuff we should be doing. But this is my tailgate version of it. When I got into the Bracco Italiano, some people got me into the conformation ring a little bit. And I started trying to understand conformation. Now, every breed has a standard, but they're looking for certain angles and certain,
Yep.
Straight hock, angle knee, a certain degree, the way the shoulder's set. Do you think that's part of the solution? I don't mean that you have to go to the show ring, but that breeders get schooled on what is the proper. I've seen some dogs that they almost look like they're on four stilts, like their legs.
Right.
I'm exaggerating.
No, but you're not. I mean, we do see that lab that comes in. And you're like, oh my God, could that back leg be any straighter?
Right.
Which is what they're not supposed to be. And so I think, yes, you're onto something. I think the problem is that we haven't identified what those features should be to not create problems down the road. And so I think you could say that the show ring, if we want to talk purely conformation, has caused as many problems as it's helped. And if you take a look at the poster child for this would be German Shepherds, right? Like, you take a look at what a working German Shepherd was 40 years ago,
Right.
with a show German Shepherd today, with that angulation and, the artificial look that it has in the show ring. And it's a non-functional dog almost compared to a working German Shepherd. And so I think that's where some of the problem has occurred, is even with our performance dogs, is that I think even if it's inadvertent, we're choosing dogs that we like the look of that maybe is creating problems long-term for these dogs. And it's going to take somebody coming back and saying, what should these dogs structure be to prevent some of these problems? And I think that's, when you talk about anything in animal health, right? Like, where does the funding come from? Who's going to do the studies? How are we going to take a look at that? And that's where I think you're correct. I think if we get back to breeding structurally sound dogs, and that's where, when I talked about my setters back, when the field dog stud book registered setters and pointers that were just outperforming, very rarely were you going to have a physical problem with those dogs, because we were breeding functional athletes to functional athletes. What happens is we like the look of something. And so now we're breeding a hunting dog that we also want to look a certain way. And I think that's where the problems come in, is we're inadvertently choosing those sort of things. And you take a look at the German breeds, right? Like, you take a look at a traditional short hair and what it looks like versus you go to a field trial and see they're vastly different looking dogs, and they're both short hairs,
Right. And if you looked at, like, my first one was back in the early 80s, it was just a house dog. We picked it up from a neighbor. And then I had this book that was a really old book on the German short hair, written by Kohler. And I was like, that looks like my dog. If you look at those pictures of those short hairs from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that Dr. Thornton brought over, I don't think we have two of them that look like that in this country.
Right. And that's where we've changed it, right? Like, it's not, what that functional breed probably was back then. And not that the breed's not still functional, but we've clearly changed it. And with those changes come some of the problems that we're seeing. And that's where I think with the cruciate issues, I think we've changed how these breeds look because it's pleasing to our eyes, but I think it's created some of these issues within some of these breeds.
Yeah. And more, and I would never say I'm not a backyard breeder. My kennel's in my backyard now. I haven't bred in years, but there's also the people that they get a title on the dog, and now I are a breeder,
right? Oh, absolutely.
And I'll pick on NAVDA for this one, and it's the organization is near and dear to my heart. You see VC. I'd rather see there's other things I'd rather see than just
Right.
that. So not only let's say the professional kennels that were always in like they used to always be in competition, and they really did only kind of pick the best to breed to.
Right.
We're like, my dog's the best, and if it went up, I don't want to, I'm going back to the show ring. If a judge were to look at it, there's probably a judge out there would be like, wow, the angulation in that back leg is terrible.
Right.
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 It is truly like to go back to the German system, where they will, when you go to a breed warden, if there's a true or confirmation flaw, even in height, they stamp do not breed on that dog's, within that club, you can't breed that dog anymore. But like you said, here in America, we know what's best and we know what we want.
Right. Right. And it's a combination, right? Because my knock on the German side of things is, at least for a while, all their x-rays were read by one guy, where it wasn't like an opinion or a measured fact. It was one guy.
Like
and
his eyes are getting big.
Right. And then they were against using stored semen, right? So then you couldn't diversify, where it was like they had those, they had a great system, and then they screwed it up in a couple of places because they weren't open-minded enough. And that's, it's that combination, right? If we could get people to see the light, so to speak, of, hey, this is what's working, but then let's tweak it with this and make it that much better.
Because they are such family members now. I'm sure in 23 years, you've seen almost helicopter parents over dogs, as opposed to you did when you first started or when you were at vet school.
Sure. Oh yeah. And just the way we, like the dog riding in the back of the pickup truck versus, the kennel systems that we have now for their safety is a big one. I mean, it's, my first years in practice, we saw all kinds of hit by cars and jumping out of back of trucks and injuries that, thankfully we just don't see that regularly anymore because we've wisened up,
I would like you to do your stump speech give somebody you're going to do a much better job of it. I don't mean chapter by chapter, but what they could expect to get with this course of yours.
Sure. So, I developed this course. I went to vet school to be the best vet for my dog. So all of this is a byproduct of me wanting to be able to offer the best care of my dogs over the course of this. So it was veterinary school, this course, all of it has kind of been a selfish endeavor in that, I've been obsessed my whole life with hunting dogs and wanted to be the best hunting dog veterinarian that I could be. And so part of that was figuring out ways to keep these dogs active in the field, because I look at each season as roughly 10% of that dog's active career, right? And so you take a couple of weeks or a month off because I didn't address an injury correctly, and I'm really affecting the enjoyment of a huge percentage of that dog's life. And so the purpose of this course was to give owners the tools to be able to address the things that they can out in the field. Because what I saw over the years is that, like, as I trained my clients to be able to staple the wounds they could staple versus recognizing the ones that need veterinary care, that by the time they got in the clinic on Monday, those wounds were healing well enough that we could get that dog out in the field the next weekend versus maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks on the shelf. And so it's giving owners the tools to keep these dogs out in the field healthy and active as possible. And so I tried to, with the course, every problem pretty much that you're going to encounter in the field, I wanted to give you a breakdown of that. These are the things I think you should, and you owe it to your dog to be able to address. And then these are the things that you're going to be over your skis. And oftentimes things that I don't even address on the tailgate, and I'm going to get into a clinic situation. As you mentioned, it's lifetime access, right? So you buy this course and you might not need it this fall, but maybe 3 falls down the road, you do. Right. And it's going to pay for itself with stopping that emergency visit or more productive days in the field. The other part of it is we're going to update. So like this summer, we're going to add modules on releasing dogs from traps, which I think is a big thing. And then like I didn't do snake bites, and I should have done snake bites in the animal encounters. And so we're going to add those modules. And so you'll have access to anything that we add in the future related to first aid in the field emergency. I think the other part is that COVID changed the veterinary profession, and we went from like this caring customer service profession to we're overworked, there's not enough of us, and everybody has a pet, and you no longer get customer service at a veterinary clinic, I truly believe, and particularly with emergent situations. And so I've had friends end up at emergency facilities waiting for hours to have their dog looked at. And if it's something that they could have fixed and one, get their dog more immediate comfort, start the healing process, and not, wait 4 hours and pay $1,000 for an emergency fee, we're that much further ahead. And so I part of it was bringing back customer service to veterinary medicine. Like at the end of the day, most of us got into this profession because we care about the dogs and the people that own those dogs. I just feel like the last 3 or 4 years, we haven't felt that way as a profession. And so I've tried to bring back the human element to veterinary medicine and care, that, we do care about these dogs and what they're doing for the people. Like you said, they're a part of our lives now, right? They're no longer a tool that's out in the kennel run to be used during the fall. It's 365 now with these dogs.
And what's really cool too is a lot of this stuff you could start practicing with your dog.
Absolutely.
In the off season, and this goes to general dog training. Get that dog when he's young used to looking at his feet, looking in his mouth, looking at his eyes, because there's a lot of dogs that people would go to the vet just because their dog won't let them look at them.
Right. And that's, I have a free first aid kit course on my website of what I recommend for a first aid kit. And I don't have a muzzle in that kit because I feel like your dogs, like especially hunting dogs, there's very few situations. I mean, outside of mainly getting hit by a car or something where they're super painful, but most of this stuff, your dog should be trained to the point that you should be able to handle them without a muzzle, Able
to bring your dog to the vet and know that when you left, all the vet techs didn't go, ay, ay, ay. I hope that if we could just give them an 8-year rabies shot, we wouldn't have to see until they're 8.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And that's, over the years, there's been clients I've fired because the dog was so vicious, where, life's too short to put me or my staff at risk for some of these dogs. It just is,
Yeah. So, people can do a better job with their, even their older dogs. You can teach an old dog to stand for an exam better. You can, but doing those early puppy things like tie out stakes and crating, letting that dog learns to settle itself. That just makes it easier on you as the dog owner, you as the vet, when we do have to go to the vet.
Absolutely. 1,000%.
And that's on us.
It is.
And that I have just seen so many dogs, and it's because I judge so many years. On a given weekend, I might see 20 puppies, right? 10 on Saturday, and if it's a 3-day test and it's a puppy test, I might see 30 dogs, and about 80% of them, I want to go like, there needs to be a course for you, right? And that's one of the reasons we built the Upland Institute, which is much like your veterinary care. It's like, it's not the only way, but it's kind of like, it's the right way. You could modify it a little bit, right? But let's do some basic foundation stuff. And that's, to me, it was kind of like, I don't know anybody that's owned a dog that didn't think like, boy, I wish I either married a vet or knew a vet, or my kid was at least a vet tech, right?
Right.
You could kind of be a vet tech. I shouldn't say that's probably not right. You could feel confident watching your system, watching your courses, I think would give people confidence to try.
Right. And I think that's, what you kind of talked about too, and you kind of fit into one of the two categories, right? Like, I feel like you have people that they think they're field trauma surgeon EMTs, and they gladly show you how their whole deck system, half of it's trauma supplies. And then you have the group that carries a cell phone and hope to God there's a veterinarian on the other end.
Right.
And the correct place is in between, right? Like, I'm not doing trauma surgery on the tailgate. I'm stabilizing. I'm either treating if I can treat, or I'm stabilizing. And I think we can all get into that category. There's almost nothing that I'm going to do on the tailgate with my own dogs that every owner shouldn't be able to do, whether it's flushing a seed out of the eye, whether it's, stabilizing something, that a break, or there's things that we all should have that ability to do. Because it might be an hour or two before you get to a vet, or it's going to save you an entire trip to the vet. And so it's finding that middle ground of, like you said, like the basics, right? Like, let's lay this foundation of, these are the things I can do and should do for my dog.
and hopefully you'll never encounter more than 5 of those things you cover.
Right. That's why
But
it's always joke. Like, I hope this is a course you purchase and it's the most wasted purchase you ever make in your life.
I hope you call up Dr. Joe and say, look, I bought this thing 8 years ago. Can I get a refund?
Exactly.
Be like, nope, but thank you. Nope, you're welcome.
Exactly.
Yeah, people do need to learn those basics and when to make that
Right.
Call. And that's what I think it really gives. You're very clear about how to try to make that call on your own and then make that decision. And the fact that you get a little, I want to say, what was that old commercial? Like, no, I'm not a doctor, but I slept in a Holiday Inn last night.
Right.
If you watch that course and then, obviously you're not going to hope for your dog to get a cut, but even get that dog on its side. And if it's got a hairy coat, learn how to go through the motions, right?
Right. Or at least recognizing where the cuts can be, right? Because that's the other thing. You get those coated dogs, and that was another impetus for all this, right? Like, we'd get the dog in on Monday or Tuesday that, the guy had been hunting all weekend, and they get home and rolls on the belly for the kids to pet. And they're like, oh, Dad, what's this great big cut, that now is nasty and infected because it probably happened on Saturday and now we're Monday or Tuesday. So just being able to figure out where some of that stuff is, even if you're not willing to fix it,
Right. Well, Joe, we could probably go on forever. I was gonna tell stories about, and I said, no, I don't want to get morose. We don't have to go into the dogs that, the dogs got hit by cars and the dogs that survived. But I'll say in closing on my side, like, they are like incredibly tough creatures. Like, if dogs were game birds, hunting dogs would be the pheasants, right? They could take a load of number 6 and keep on going.
Right.
But that's also deceiving to us because we think they're okay all the time.
Right. And it is, a dog will come in not putting its leg down and people will say, well, at least they're not in pain. I'm like, well, if it wasn't in pain, it would put its leg on the ground. So because they're great at continuing.
Yeah, he still got excited when I put my gun in the cage. Sure he is, but he's in pain. But anyway, exactly. I hope everybody, and I think I said this in the beginning, you're going to do a webinar with Ugly Dog, Hunting Dog with Mike Nadesky. By the time people hear this, they'll be able to go back and replay that.
They should be able to. Yep, they could either reach out to Mike or I, and we can send links to that sort of thing.
Right. So, and I would say, like, you would not spend better money than to do your course and get your course and keep that in your phone, in your hip pocket, as we say. Because like I said, when I watched it, I was like, covering things like I won't do, like I wouldn't even do the stitches, right? I'm like, nope. And not that I'm afraid of looking at blood. I'm like, nope, I'm not taking that call. But you say always go to your vet if you don't do it. Right. And I've heard people say, oh no, I've stapled up my dogs. That sounds to me as foreign as welding does. Never weld. A stapler, but you covered it all, A to Z. And other than, like you said, snake bites and traps, but that's
we'll get those at it by this fall. So,
and I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope we finally do run into each other.
Likewise, I appreciate this.
As we figured out before we hit record, I said, Joe, have we met before? We didn't, but it's been a pleasure, Joe.
Likewise, thank you so much.
You bet. Let me end that recording.